All right. Well, hello, everybody on Zoom and in the room. Did you see how I did that? I think most of you know me. I'm Michelle Young. I'm Director of Libraries at Clarkson. I'm your NYLA and NYLIN president. And we are very happy to have Jason Schmitt in the room, the director and creator of Paywall, the movie. Jason is a journalist, documentary producer, an associate professor, and chair of communication and media at Clarkson University.
Yes, I am.
And my friend. And so I'm very happy to have you here today with us. Just anybody that's on Zoom, if you just make sure you're muted so we don't have feedback, you can put some of your questions in chat, or at the end, we will allow you guys to ask your questions. But I do have prepared questions that we'll go through first.
And I wanted to say that, so of this whole project, the very first interview, the first person that had trust and faith in this was Michelle. And we just, from there, the ball started rolling, and you just, were so willing to be part without knowing any of, what it would turn out to be. But so many people have just put their trust in this and hope to, spur something on. And the global community now, it's just kind of crazy how many people have a common view, yet it's muted. I'm already on my soapbox, but it's, around the world, it's everybody thinks very similar.
So that is a good lead into what moved you to make this movie, and who's your audience? Who did you make it for? And just a little brief bit about your world tour and maybe the most exotic place you got to visit.
Well, there was a lot of questions there. Okay, so as a journalist, I always wrote about kind of corporate creativity and innovation, and that was my early kind of beat, I suppose. And I just stumbled upon $25 billion comes out of higher education. Literally like late at night, scrolling through websites. It was somebody at a University of Ottawa that had a blog, talked about the amount of money out of higher education and science. I thought, that can't be right. And the profit margins, clearly that's not, correct, more than Apple and Google. And I started to write about it, and I started to get fascinated because it represented global inequality. That's another kind of theme of my life, I think. I was, in all of my classes, first day of all university classes, I talk about, isn't it nice that my students think it's normal that they're with students like them, but they're not seeing the hundreds or maybe thousands of students that would like to have their butts in the seats, but can't because they're invisible now because of this, and we don't see them. And so I'm big into global inequality in kind of my education. So corporate profits, crazy, global inequality. It was like, okay, this is kind of meant for me as a journalist. And so I started doing what I do, calling people, interviewing them, writing about it. And those pieces were some of the biggest, like, self-amplified pieces. I mean, like 400,000 people were reading these, which normally I would never get that number. And I started to become, a little bit more of, knowing what I was talking about. First couple pieces, you're just trying to figure it out and get a kind of orientation. All of a sudden, after doing it, more and more for a couple of years, now people are calling to interview me a little bit on open access. And so I would kind of spew out the idea of, these inequalities and this profit margin. And often the journalists then that were quoting me would then get contacted by some of the largest publishers to say, we'd really like to dispute that fact. And we would really think that that's totally incorrect. And then it's happened 4 times. The journalist then would contact me and say, a large publisher, I'm not going to say which one, has contacted me saying your facts and figures are incorrect. You stand behind what you said. And I said, absolutely, I stand behind that. No, this is correct. Here's my data from a well-reputable source. It's spent her whole life doing SPSS and documenting, so it was quite reliable. And how interesting that is, that there's so much power behind this kind of gear mechanism that there's almost hand sanitizer to clean the path and like the germs, which maybe is me in some sense. So that just, I think, as kind of a investigative person, fueled me to really, okay, if you have these massive, powerful companies that have such a vested interest, you have global inequality, and you have like a sanitizing, I mean, that's just too attractive of a topic not to want to further. And so, that started the ability of focusing on open access, and then the filming side of my professional life came to be, because the more you look at open access and talk to people, it's so disjointed, and the whole open access movement is ridiculously like mean to each other. No, don't listen to that organization. They don't know what they're doing. We should do it this way. And there's the disjointed nature and the lack of a narrative is so problematic. because at the end of the day, it's not for librarians. And when we think about this stuff a lot, it's for general society. And so that is where you went with the second is my focus from day one is I want to be a little bit too basic for those that are really focused on open access. If they say that I don't get to the peculiarities and the deep conversations, that's my goal, is to not do that, because that would make it inaccessible for the bulk of society. I want to do, open access, a little bit Cliff Notes version, so that the general society member who's not in academia could really understand this and hopefully be activated to do something, to call their congressperson or to, reach out to their maybe even public librarian and to say, why don't I have access to this? And so that's always been, my goal. And I think we did it pretty well, because those are some of those comments I got. This isn't deep enough. You don't go into the complexities of, green or diamond or, which often gets too complex for some people to, understand the differences. And I'm quite happy with that. So you do this project, you want to go to the third tier of I felt like I've been on the United States of America apology tour, because I feel like we are lagging. We as of a month and beyond ago. I feel like we've had a lot of recent successes, but we can get to that. But historically, I feel like the United States is massively lagging behind any sort of European or progressive nation that's had a more orientated, focused push against some of the publishers. I feel like the United States is too disjointed. So many, small kind of, collectives of libraries. They can't get a larger public voice. And we have 5,300 universities, which are some of the most prestigious on the global stage. Yet we are, probably the most complacent in supporting the system and allowing it to continue to perpetuate. Amsterdam or Taiwan or Germany or Peru, all these nations have at some point in the last couple of years said, no, we're not going to do this. We're not going to renew that subscription. And, we haven't done that historically. So that was something that, I've been feeling as I keep doing these talks. I've been, kind of all over the place with, Iceland and, London and Oxford a couple times. And, was at Côte d'Azur in Nice, France here maybe about 3 weeks ago. And I was in Indonesia at Open Science Collective here also about maybe less than a month ago. And Germany and Berlin and Munich. And because, again, Europe seems to have a little bit more progressive views. So I think that's been more traction of this film. So I've done a lot of travel, and I'm not compensated by any of it. I'm thrilled to be getting to stand. In all of our lives, you try to have a cause that you want to, we're all going to be fertilizing oak trees in 60 years, so let's do something real. Yeah. And so I feel like I've drew a line somewhere in the sand at some point in my life. I don't know when that actual moment is, and I'm still trying to head to that goal. And that's where I am.
That's awesome. Yeah. Thank you. And it actually, as if this was planned, led right into the next two questions. I'll ask one at a time, of course. What are you thinking, looking for, or maybe asking about UC's decision to terminate negotiations with Elsevier? This is big news now. So
yeah, okay. What I was hoping when I learned about it, it was almost it's too good to be true. I think it's not. I mean, I feel like you have the largest university system in the United States that has really had a task force that's really looked at this conversation deeply and had long-standing negotiations for several months of Elsevier and subscriptions, and they have concluded that again, it's not in the best interest for broad society to continue to perpetuate it, and they were the place that decided to take a hard stand. I think that's going to have major ramifications because I think the United States is so modeled, especially in developing nations that are trying to increase their education systems. Mm-hmm. Some of the more elite universities in the United States, some of those are in California. Stanford comes to mind. I mean, there's a couple China universities that have been constructed in a very similar architecture with very similar kind of curriculum and research progression to what Stanford is, and it's almost like a blueprint of successful universities. So when I see somebody of the pedigree of Berkeley and the larger UC system standing behind that, I think it's going to have global implications. I also am really excited for it to have more universities through the United States that say, this is a possibility. Yeah. So when this film was done 8 months ago, when we kind of were doing the interviews, everybody was saying, no, nobody stands up against Elsevier. Well, all of a sudden, good.
Yeah.
I want this thing to be so outdated. It deserves to be the most, I really hope that this is just like, a historic film of the craziness that we've perpetuated, and hopefully it's not relevant in going forward. And I think the UC is that big, the big first. But California's kicking butt right now. They just said that anything funded through the state of California with public money has to be made open access. Unfortunately, it's a year embargo, which isn't preferable in my world, because think of again, me as like a journalist, that first year of I think of more popular articles because it disseminates in my mind better. That's the attractive year for that piece.
Right.
And you're not usually reading a Wired magazine article from 2016 and 2019 or something. So when I see embargoes, I don't think it's perfect, but regardless, I think state of California, by doing that, again sends a strong message from California. We are in New York. I think that in my mind, looking at how things often roll out in the United States, so if California is the first state that starts to really draw a hard line into open access, in my mind, I think the state of New York needs to be that second sort of shoe to fall or thing to be engaged. If you're buying what that's selling, I'm starting to get kind of focused now and say, okay, if we think there's any logic to New York being the second state to follow California's lead, then what's the lever? What gives us the most kind of oomph? And I think that is the SUNY system. And they are set to renegotiate Elsevier contracts for right now. And I think that's a really strong conversation that needs to be had. So I'm hopeful for that.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
What about Plan S in Germany? And some of the people online here or even in the room may not be completely aware of that. Could you just speak briefly about it and what it means for the United States, if anything?
Yeah, it means a lot for the United States because we get to kind of water ski behind the Plan S bandwagon. Plan S is created through the Coalition S. It was originally led by Robert Jan Smits of Science Europe. It's now led through Mark Schlitz because Robert Jan has taken a president position over in Europe. And what it is it's a 16 large European funders have said anything that receives funding from these 16 collectives is going to be open access. And there's a list of mandates that has to meet. And it's 2020 and beyond. So they're looking at 2020 as the date that everything is going to be open access that receives funding. And so what was originally just European funders has now got the backing of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation with their $7.5 billion a year that goes to science. And the Wellcome Trust also signed on recently from the UK with £1.5 billion towards science. So there's major money that's behind this initiative. As such, I mean, if Elsevier is picking on little journalist Jason that makes no money and is doing really just barely getting any dust up, they're very kind of agitated about this Plan S, and so there's a lot of competing messages and there's a lot of pushback. Some of it is legitimate and some of it is funded directly through these largest publishers that fund open access initiatives. There's several initiatives that I could speak about, and I will just keep them anonymous by saying that they get almost all of their funding through these large publishers. So then all of the mandates and all of the language and all of the assessment from smart minds comes out with a very strategic view, often against true open access, because who's paying that money? Which is why I like Plan S, though, because that is these funders saying, who in fact hold the money, saying we're not going to contribute to this. And there's a transitionary period that hybrid has to be made obsolete within a year after the 2020. And there's a whole list of kind of objectives that have to be met. And I think it's going to have major ramifications, for the United States. Again, even just the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, because that's so massive, the biggest foundation on the global stage. So we're seeing. I don't think that the UC system would have done this without Plan S.
I would agree.
And Plan S came out on September 4th. Our film happened to come out September 5th by no coordination. Within the first 10 days of Plan S's announcement, from September 4th to September 14th, Elsevier's stocks had dropped 13%. You had then that was, and it slowly creeped back up. And then last week, when UC's system announced that it's leaving, again, NASDAQ RELX majorly down again. So the shareholders are a little bit on keeping their eyebrows kind of raised right now, watching some of their dividends maybe not maturing quite as quick as they'd hoped.
Interesting. Is there a perspective that can grant any validity or justification for publishers' profit margins? They offer a valuable service. So is that enough? And then, sorry, it's a little long.
No, that's good.
Can libraries provide content and publishers make reasonable profit, keeping both entities financially stable?
Absolutely. I mean, look at, there's some great open access publishers that have reasonable charges. Hindawi comes to mind. They've made a successful business, but it's not obscene profit. I don't think that one way that I can justify my disdain for the largest publishers' current profit margins is where that profit really starts to amplify. And that's in 2004, 2005. It's one of the, there's a graphic in the film, I think, of science technology within Elsevier. You see the massive spike of profit margins right when digital dissemination starts to really be propagated. So you're looking at, that's a big difference, because, you know, when things were bound and had to be put into envelopes and actually mailed to libraries, and you actually had that physical thing, that, you know, there was a lot of costs there, and the glue and the paper and the glossy. All of a sudden, but the profits then were very minimal. They were very, you know, tolerable. It's 2005 and on when everything becomes digital dissemination, where there's no cost. That's the beauty of the digital world, is I can create a file that I share with you, but there's no extra cost for me to share that with every single other human being on planet Earth. The same cost for everybody, and just you. And so that's the ability to allow these massive profits to propagate. And who pays the burden for that is science and progress. I mean, I'm sick of cancer not being solved. I'm sick of these, you know, major issues not having more traction and more, you know, more takeaway. So I think that I can directly hold the profit margins accountable. And I don't think that anybody can look at a profit margin of 30. Elsevier's 2018 profits just came out. They had a 37% profit margin in 2018. Yeah, and I don't think anybody could justify that, and especially on the back of higher education, especially on the back of public funding.
And so we know return on investment for these big contracts for different schools are different.
Yeah.
It seems like the system, when print went to digital, they went to print and digital kind of without adjusting, right? It's kind of like we have our courses in classrooms, and then we switch to online courses. And, you know, there's a lot of professors that didn't switch the way that they teach. They just tried to slap their in-classroom course onto a video screen, thinking that that might work, which, of course, it doesn't.
Yes.
And that kind of feels like what's happened in the publishing industry. And so do you think there's any way to start over and create a new process? Do you think publishers would be willing to take a chance?
I think publishers is the wrong question. I think it's a society that's willing to take a chance.
Okay.
Is it repositories that are willing to take a chance? Is it a collective of these scholarly societies that's willing to take a chance? But you know what? That was a really important, that scholarly societies are massively trapped entities right now. And that's a huge problematic conversation. If you are a scholarly society, you sell your proceedings, your journals to a large publisher that then promotes and sells that to content. And that gives you and your scholarly society $5 million a year, let's say. And you use that money really wisely to help graduate students to travel for cheaper and to keep the costs of conferences down. So they're caught in this kind of bind that a lot of scholarly societies, at least the ones I've talked to, want to promote open access, but their business model will majorly falter, or at least need to be reimagined. So there's kind of these processes that are inhibiting the total rollout of open access. And I think that, you know, we have to look at how we can continue to fund some of these in other measures. So again, if we buy that there's maybe enough money in the system, then money needs to be taken out of what we're currently paying for obscene costs, and perhaps some of that earmarked to go to scholarly societies that hopefully benefit that university or that, you know, college well. So I think it's envisioning a new ecosystem completely. That will still have publishers. You know, I don't think the CNS disease, cell nature science, is going anywhere.
Right.
But I think that you know, I think that can be the glossy Cadillac option. And I'm not interested in the Cadillac. I'm interested in the, you know, Focus, the Ford Focus option, which everybody has access to. And so I think that's going to be a conversation that will be done, hopefully top down, to publishers. Because if nothing else, publishers have taught us that they can whoop the heck out of negotiations of academics. Academics are the world's worst negotiators. So, well, yeah, sure, no, oh, yes, no one won't say anything to anybody. yeah, no, here's our cash. And if history's taught us anything, we need to, to have a different sort of negotiation strategy with publishers.
So if we were trying to kind of think about the future, it seems like right now there's major collision between our financial economy and our knowledge economy.
Yeah.
So what do you think we can expect from each as work like yours gets out and UC starts, they pull away and we've got Plan S and let's hope New York follows, right?
I hope.
So, what do you think about the financial economy and the knowledge economy collisions? Do you think there's a pathway? Do you forecast a pathway forward that might be more equitable?
I want to talk about dancing.
Yeah.
2010, the Wired magazine editor Chris Anderson wrote an article about crowd-accelerated innovation. And that was 2010, 2008 was the first iPhone. So it was just kind of the birth still of early internet shareability. And Chris Anderson said that he saw through analytics a massive change of dancing. And how? Well, so YouTube's starting to propagate. And this specific article talked about dancers from Detroit and Jamaica. And historically, if you're a Detroit-based dancer, you dance within your region, and same in Jamaica. Now, all of a sudden, with YouTube, the ability to share your dance moves, I can compete and get sort of angst-ridden because your dance moves are better than mine, and I'll try to top it. And so now we're having a new competitive economy that's spurring and raising the cumulative bar on both dancing cultures so much to the likes that humankind has never seen. And I think that sort of shows what it's like when you connect the broader neural network. We live in an information economy that's starved in information. That's something, again, that I think we just saw a little bit in the film is, without the ability to have free knowledge, how can you create these information economy collectives that can really broadly assess and do deep data analytics when you can't have access to the data? We have all the technology to do these analytics. We just don't have access to that data. And I think that's a major problem with the financial versus the broad, just collective intelligence. So again, I like to think that, in an information economy where all of a sudden it's the knowledge that, I always tell this to my students, 1950s or 60s, you could say, college is dumb. I don't need this. I'm going to go walk into a factory. I have strong muscles and brawn, and I'm reliable. And I could easily get a job for $50,000, adjusted for inflation, middle class kind of, strong job. And that was the 60s of kind of just biceps. Now I think my college students don't have that option. They have to sort of, play this information economy game. And that's what our whole curriculum is about, is understanding how to always compete in this information economy. So we need to create a system then that is at least equitable. If we're training everybody and we're thinking that still higher education it gives us assets for leadership and eventually salary benefits and more power and prestige, and we're training everybody for information, an information economy or an information world, we need to at least for broad accessibility have everybody have access to that information. And I think that's a real disparity that we as higher education allow to happen and perpetuate.
The role of Sci-Hub is noteworthy because while your interview subjects seem to all agree that there's a need for access to research publications, many condemned access provided from a pirate repository. So there are interesting moralities at work here. What are your thoughts on this?
Did you buy the thing first of all, I always have to say Napster was an illegal torrent site.
Yes.
Nobody knows that anymore since it's so long ago.
I'm old enough. I know about Napster.
So that was my first job out of university.
Yeah.
I wasn't that great of a student, and I got a job at Atlantic Records. It sounded way cooler than it was, and I was pushing paper. And that was in 2000. That was right when Napster came out. And my friends and I, inside of the Atlantic Records headquarters mailroom, making $6 an hour, would log into our computer and listen to Napster and go, oh gosh, that quality's not as good. We have nothing to worry about. But you hear the new Metallica songs before they're released. No, the quality's not as good though. It sounds tinny and airy. It's never going to take the quality of this digital CD. Within 1 year, we were all out of a job. Low level, we were the easy expendable people. And I was like, I had like social cachet of at least saying I had a cool brand. And I was angry about that for a couple of years. And, eventually, life sorts itself out. But the anger started to eventually manifest into seeing what was illegal in that moment. Napster was clearly illegal, and there was a huge RIAA. All the largest record labels were massively against Napster, not very unsimilar to what the large publishers now are against these new conversations in open access and Sci-Hub. So I saw what was illegal eventually transcend into Spotify and into Pandora and into Amazon Music in the legal means. And I think that we can start to see what is perhaps illegal on initial glance is actually just showing a new user interface that eventually can have the legalness sorted out through its history. So I mean, I think that Sci-Hub is showing a very important component of showing how the user experience of scholarship is massively broke. And in the United States, one of the biggest markets that uses Sci-Hub is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, one of the most prestigious university networks in the United States. Why? The broad society, most in Cambridge have access through their universities. But it's, you're outside the university at night, you have to authenticate, you forget your authentication, it's not always your same signature as your email, you have to go through, you have to find your database, we all know this, so you talk about this all the time. So instead, these, especially millennials, are saying, hey, no, I'll just go to Sci-Hub, take 1 second, right, and bam, there it is. Boom, one button, download it. It's not about legalness, it's about the user experience and the one-click options. And so I think that it is showing kind of the path forward. And I think, again, the new generation of millennial and beyond is never going to accept, because they've never had to accept, a system that is exclusionary. And because that millennial learned early in their youth how to torrent. And they maybe had some of their right and wrong kind of arbitrary associations on maybe movies or music decided on through that torrent kind of culture. And so going forward, I think they're going to always, strive for access and not take a paywall or something that inhibits them at face value. So I think there's evolution.
So Mary Carroll on Zoom has a comment/question regarding this question.
Oh, cool.
So she says, I think the difference with Napster is that it hurt individual musical artists.
That's right.
With large publishers, are the individual authors or researchers being hurt financially? Spotify, Pandora, etc., still undercompensate musical artists. So your thoughts on Mary Carroll's comment?
That's a great point, and that's absolutely true. It's not a perfect sort of proxy for one for the other, because musicians, when their music was taken, that was often their main income. So they had to go to merchandise and touring to supplement what they originally had. They used to have in CD sales.
Right.
But there was a lot of new artists that came out, like OK Go or Amanda Palmer, that was able to do a Kickstarter campaign for her new album in 2015 called the something Orchestra. Amanda Palmer's and whatever, she raised $1.5 million to get away from the main publisher. Point being, so musicians adapted, but yes, they were directly hit financially. Academics are doing everything in this whole process for free, and their whole compensation is based, again, probably on tenure and review and the merit that they have within their research or scientific community. And their sole funding comes from that pathway, not from the service that they do for their discipline or for the journals that they do or that they serve or edit for. So I think that I think it's actually much more in favor of this conversation towards going open access and breaking ties with large publishers. I think that's much more palatable than the conversation of, oh no, forget the record labels. Just we're gonna just download illegally.
Right.
The implications are much greater, I think, on the musician side than the monetary changes that would happen in the academics.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, and Christy shared the Amanda Palmer album
good.
there.
Oh,
so
cool, nice. Grand Theft, that's a yes.
Awesome. Okay, Springer Nature announced last week that they will partner with ResearchGate to pilot a program in which select nature journals will be rolled out to researchers' ResearchGate profiles to remove barriers to access. Other companies like Elsevier have sued ResearchGate for copyright infringement. So do you think this approach by Springer could represent a significant change in how scholarly publishing community views or handles the sharing of research products? And does this represent a surrender by Springer? We were quite shocked to read this news.
I'm quite shocked.
You may not have even heard of it.
I have not heard of that. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I think the only way that I can't answer that completely.
Of course.
It's a very hard question. I think what I can say is I see curation is the big component of ResearchGate, of crowd curation and trusting. I like what you share on social, and I like you as a person. So when you say something about a brand or a study or a quality of anything, maybe it's just like cars or just general life, I'm going to trust that because I trust you as a human being.
Right.
And that creates kind of this ecosystem of knowledge exchange where we're trusting others. I think that can really almost help to. Peer review is a one-stage process in a digital economy that happens at one point in time, and then is that stamp is done, and that's it. When we live in a digital world, the conversations continuously live on. I see, curation as almost a component of peer review, where we can have a continual conversation about validities, and especially when you go into the reproducibility crisis in science. And this is, I'm getting null, and it shows I should have a finding here. Maybe and 14 other people have done that too.
Yeah.
Let's not just have some article that you can't attach that to. Let's have that curation that says, no, we're all finding null in this, and this might not be as valid. And I feel like that gets at least a string of what you're talking about with the ResearchGate Springer. I think Springer's always been pretty progressive, much more so in my mind than other publishers, with their stance. So that actually makes sense that they would be the first to do that. That's fascinating.
Yeah, we'll share this with you. This literally, I think I sent it to you like 2 days ago or a day ago. Wow. And I was like, it was like last week I'm like, wow. And then lots of wows.
A lot of wows.
Okay. So we're winding down. We've only got a couple more questions.
We should say something about Wiley, though, too, and the Project Deal at Germany, saying that, so that actually goes to Springer a little bit. So other publishers maybe that are slightly progressive, being pushed progressive more than they are maybe wanting to be. But Project Deal, which is a collective of 700 universities and research networks in Germany, has said to the Wiley group that they'll still continue to pay for their articles, but they want everybody to have access for the read options of that. And so that was an agreement that was made. It's not as progressive, I think, as it's still paid access. But I think that also needs to be. So there's a lot of leverage points that are happening with publishers right now. And that, again, that Project Deal with Wiley, I think, is another one that just at least needs to be stated here.
There's Metro, which is our Manhattan-based group. They have a question. Is there a transcript of the film available anywhere?
Yes.
They'd love to be able to share portions of the interviews.
Absolutely. We have it's called an SRT file. That's for any transcription. That's on GitHub. We also have, if you Google Paywall and transcription, it comes up. It's been translated into many languages, too many to count at this point. But we do have a blank .srt transcription, and if you can't find it, if you just email me, I promise I'll send it right to you as well. It is closed captioned as well. I think the closed caption might be on Internet Archive. The Internet Archive has the 8 gigabyte and also an 80 gigabyte if you're ever going to show it with like a large screen.
Right.
But so it's in so many places. That's what you get when you do CC BY 4.0. It just goes everywhere, and it's hard to keep track.
And someone was just asking about closed captioning. So Cheryl, it sounds like there is.
There is.
If Metro or that's probably Winnie Lurk, right? If you can't find what you're looking for, shoot me a note, and I'll get it with Jason, and I will. We'll get it to you.
Yep.
So we have 15 minutes left. Does anybody on the line that's not typing questions in text want to ask any verbally? Okay, hearing none, I'm asking another one. Y'all waited too long. Sorry. All right. This is the last really beefy question.
I skirted through the rest. Okay, I don't.
I'm not that damaged. Wow. No, you're good. You are good. We're just putting you right through the.
I know.
We did not share. I did not share these questions. So, but he didn't share the questions with me when I was interviewed. So it's fair game.
That is. I deserve it.
Okay. Does the open access movement critique the limits of capitalism as a system for creating and exchanging knowledge, or does it preserve and defend the market as a workable support for creating and sharing knowledge? Where we're going with this one, and I can even hand this to you if you want to look at the question. Okay. Aaron Schwartz is active downloading JSTOR content at MIT. So U.S. government he got several indictments against him, while the Internet Society inducted him into the Hall of Fame. Like,
Yes.
so the real big question of this is, where's the middle ground? How do we find that?
Well, I feel like Aaron Schwartz is a great starting point for that conversation. And I feel like I wanted to have him in this film, and I have, great testimony of people talking about, everything that he stood for. And, it couldn't be in the film. It was so complex. It was just almost, it's a great documentary in its own right. The internet's, internet, shoot, I can't think of it, Aaron Schwartz documentary. But what he started was a movement that really showed the repressive regime of academic publishing. And JSTOR had a real chance to back down at multiple times and continue to stay at the highest threshold of legal jurisdiction, which eventually took his life. And Internet's own boy, if there's somebody put that, that's what the documentary is called. It's phenomenal. Sitting there with Chris Borg, the head librarian at MIT, and listening, and she was getting quite emotional about Aaron Schwartz. And that was, you're listening to this, and you're thinking, we do like academic publishing. We talk about this all the time. We think, and to most people, it doesn't seem like, it's not like guns or anything. And but yeah, it's not like mafia. But hearing what he stood for and hearing how MIT has drastically changed their stance, so much so that they say now that Sci-Hub really is a great opportunity to see what's wrong in academic publishing. I think shows what he has stood for. I think we're seeing a lot of these hard stances starting to. I think they have to be hard stances initially, but then they become more mass disseminated, and I think that is where we're seeing. I feel like there's a thread to what we talked about with Spotify.
Yeah.
What was illegal eventually becomes legal, and then what becomes legal is so great and so unfathomable for what your old scenario. I can have every song at my fingertips. I can eventually have every academic research article. Not for me, for the global South, for people that don't have access, that know that they don't have access. And that's the problem with the Western world is a lot of the leaders that are so strong don't even know that they don't have access or what it's like to not have access and don't know what they're missing. So, I think that this equation's sorting itself out. I think that, we're seeing, I think that the biggest successes are when we're pushing the hand and sort of making those choices for the for-profit entities. They're never going to make those choices. Why would they? That's never in their interest. And so what we're starting to obtain through collective action, I think, is going to have more and more effect for rollout. Again, not for us, but for the whole world, that we as higher education ambassadors get the honor and prestige to help to speak for, sadly.
We've got two more online questions from Southeastern. Part of NYLA, so NYLA, New York State Library Association, part of NYLA's legislative agenda this year includes a push towards transparent contracting, starting with publicly funding colleges.
Great.
So do you think it's possible, or is it a pipe dream? You think we're going to make it this time?
I think that when you follow the use, if you would ask me a month ago, I would say no, because I hadn't seen anything roll out successfully. We've seen, there's a couple scholars out of the state of California that did a Freedom of Information Act in 2014 that, that got some data, but it was sparse. And then Stuart Lawson in my film from London, Burbank, also did a Freedom of Information Act request, but that's not enough. I think that when you have large collectives in the state that can get that information and make that transparent, I think that's when you're going to at least start seeing market value of this. The problem is that it's when these contracts come up, and they don't come up that often. So you're not going to always, and it takes a concerted effort to do this. So are you going to get Rutgers or Carnegie Mellon? So is that important, or even Big Ten and these other universities? It's not going to happen just on one day.
Right.
Because these contracts are at different time periods. So again, one more plug. I feel like this is the time for the state of New York, again, because I think SUNY system is getting ready to renegotiate. And if SUNY can make more transparency a process, I think we're going to see the ramifications for the broad state of New York. And in conjointed effort with California, then I think we can really start seeing a few more. Massachusetts would be another logical first state.
Okay. How can we as libraries not get stuck in the same pay patterns with our tools that we see as indispensable as libraries like Elsevier.
Yeah.
So like we have resource sharing tools that are, they're the big companies, they're very expensive. Smaller libraries can't pay for subscriptions. So maybe, the school with a lot of money has it, but the smaller library does not have it. Is this not equivalent to what we see in, third world countries where research is not affordable?
Well, yeah, it's the price point that it's, all these different small universities are little satellites to a larger one that has a larger budget. And how do you create that shared resource? I don't know the answer to that. I know that it was just kind of eye-opening when I was in Iceland recently and was learning that every single resident in Iceland has access to all the research that any university in Iceland subscribes to through their public library, because that public library is directly associated with that university structure.
Awesome.
That's not that hard to even, we have how many smart people that are thinking about this? And I was just like, my jaw just dropped. I was like, so I mean, I think also making a point to really keep asking for broader access through your public library system and looking at more liaison ways to get university data and bandwidth to public libraries creates a system where it's not big person satellites orbiting that don't have the same access. That's exclusionary, and that's not. And then especially in a world that already is having a lot of problems right now, as we see a lot of small colleges and universities, especially in the Northeast, folding. In Southern Vermont a couple days ago, Green Mountain College, which I actually was a faculty at several years ago, just folded. These smaller colleges and universities are in dire problems budget-wise, just in their own kind of faculty student relations, and that's not even bringing the fact that they can't afford to have access to the cutting edge research. So they're in like this double bind that's really creating a real have and have not, just in the United States as well. So that's problematic.
So what's next for you in your work? Where are you going from here? What can we do to help?
No, I'm doing pretty good right now. I'm interested in reproducibility crisis in science. So that's something I've been really starting to read up on. And my process is I'm going to take a year of writing again as a journalist, starting to get stories and kind of the way that this film started. I think a year of acting as a journalist, just thinking about the story and interviewing people is a good way for me to build that repertoire. And then from there, maybe that is something in the broader scheme of that.
Awesome.
So yeah, it's exciting. Okay, one last thing.
Yes.
Times New Roman's good, but if I would have spent the same amount of hours just on a book, I don't know if it would have been as impactful. Thinking of the different modalities of communicating human knowledge in 2019, I think is something that, broader, I think that's a good platform for my soapbox right now, talking to a broad outlay of New York librarians and even thinking of, as we talked about, the DOI and how that doesn't really, I've been recently trying to get a DOI for this film, and we've been working closely, and it's very tricky. And I think that as we're progressive in seeing media having more impact in a scholarly way, I think we can start to see ways to maybe embed that into some more of our searches and more of our outlets as well, if there's value, and there, that's case by case basis.
Certainly. I have to say, I neglected the people right in the room. Do y'all have questions? Okay. No. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any final questions? We have 2 minutes, and we've got some funny feedback going on.
Right now.
Yeah.
So,
question here.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Has there been a thought of approaching the academy, meaning academy with a capital A, about this issue, as opposed to just taking it to the general populace?
Yeah, I think there has. I think when you say academy with capital A, it's actually the tenure and review committees. Yeah. Is with a capital T maybe and R. And there's a lot of separation. The provost has deans that report to her or him. Those deans have chairs that report to her or him. And there's purposeful separation at each of those points. And I think those separations are good. It gives disciplines autonomy, which is very important, but that allows these disciplines then to have their own merit tools and their own assessment of tenure. And often those that are assessing the tenure committees are generally associate or full professors, probably full or associate professors, better way of saying that. And perhaps they've been taught to stand on those shoulders of those that come before them. And that creates a system that kind of allows this, this perpetual notion of what's acceptable for a field specific. So I really think that is where I think there could be a massive concerted effort towards tenure. I don't know how that looks or what it's orchestrated or even what the lever is that activates that, because again, it's very different at different institutions, but I do feel that is the lever of actual change. The Academy's acceptance is the tenure committee's acceptance. And I don't know what am I supposed to do when I'm talking to like young junior scholars? Am I supposed to tell them that, you should publish in open access because it's non-repressive and it's good for the global economy? But am I shooting them kind of in the foot in a sense in their own careers? Because I have tenure now, and does that help me? But does that actually help junior scholars? Mm-hmm. So it's just really, So I feel like I keep saying, okay, associate and full professors should definitely do everything they can for their discipline and their larger department to embrace open access, but to maybe at least give those junior scholars, if they have some reason and rationale to not do that right away, realize they have their career and life interest at stake. Mm-hmm. So those are complexities I don't know how to answer.
And maybe we watch California, and see what happens there, because certainly the Elsevier deal could have some very major impact on
Absolutely. That's very true.
We have a question in the room, Meg.
That just makes me think about the whole university system and the decline of tenure track positions.
Yeah.
And all of that shift. And
that's true too.
So then adjuncts aren't conducting research. They don't.
So just in case anyone on Zoom couldn't hear, Meg is concerned about the decrease or decline in tenured positions at universities. Yeah. Adjuncts are not doing research. Like, what does this mean for academia?
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Okay, so we're at 7:31, and I think we should hold hard on our time for our guest. And I just cannot thank you enough. I've enjoyed this project from the day we shared tea and started talking to the interview that made me nervous. And now here, this is much better. I like this side of the fence. But thank you for your knowledge and your hard work. And I'm sure if everyone could give an applause online, I'm sure they can or can't, but we're really grateful for everything. Someone just said thank you for the program and progress. Thank you so much. Of course.
Oh.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Honored.
Okay, if anybody needs to follow up, Meg or myself, follow up with us, and we'll get you, additional answers or autographs from our famous person here. Yeah. We've got royalty in the room in the North Country. So, thanks, guys. Have a good night.